Well, look, this is Dr. Chris Lemmon, and this is my December chat, actually the last one for the year. So happy holidays as you see this. Um, what this last year I've been doing is talking about concepts that I had that I applied in teaching. I ran a center for 14 years and so I worked with clients for quite a few years before that and then retired out and did around and did lectures and talks and different workshops throughout the United States until the the COVID change occurred, and then it's kind of like everything got shut down. And so I've kind of stepped back to just doing these talks. Next year, I will do talks, but they're going to be more conceptual ideas that spurred my thinking. In other words, we're getting back into more mathematics, more concept pieces. I won't do any mathematics, but just kind of originally when I went to college, I was in engineering, and that's kind of where I started. And then I realized that I really didn't want to be an engineer. So I had to switch to something, and I couldn't decide between teaching and psychology. And so I went into psychology, and I guess I wound up doing more teaching than psychology. But anyway, that was kind of where I was at. Um, the last concept that I tried to integrate into students as a teacher and facilitator for a lot of years, and as a lecturer, is that we have to learn to not seek out answers all the time. We need to seek out better questions. Um, my inspiration for some of this was I like philosophers. I do a lot of reading. Uh, Heidegger was one that inspired me a lot. He was famous for his lectures would start at 8 in the morning, go to 8 at night, and they would take breaks for food. But he would talk on and on. And the goal was is that he would have students bring in questions and they would convert the questions into more questions. His goal at the end of 12 hours of lecture is to have more questions and no answers. He said the secret to life is to be able to ask another question. And and somewhere in that you may get practical applications that you can apply. I'm not saying it's useless, but I'm saying as you start to flow, you start to realize this, wow, and that's what I call opening range up. You start to expand things out to bigger ideas. You have a small problem, you have a solution. That seems like what we do, but it all gets tied into a narrow range. My experience in life has been that people can resolve things over here, but then when they have something that's applicable and they've already have experience with it, but it's framed differently. So they can't resolve it over here. They're confused. A lot of people have come to me and like life changes, get out of relationships, they get out of illness, they something occurs in their life and they can't get back into that normal range. And so things are different. And so when you look at why are things different, you're asking and trying to find an answer. And really you need to flow into questions. I think one of the greatest where I was inspired by the work of Clare Graves, and originally he put together something that he called a value system that's changed names. He's changed names. He worked on this for over 12 years. He was a psychology teacher. I think it was somewhere in like Indiana or someplace like that. Union College comes to mind. But he put together a system, and at the time, I think it was Lords and Price were doing an analysis. They were getting paid to analyze by all the large churches on the planet, and and they were seeking out as like, why do people change? Churches were having an effect that was a change, maybe attendance, maybe donations. I have no idea, but they were saying, why do we're seeing a change? Why is that? And Lord and Price were doing surveys, analysis. He then started assigning letters to those different key points analysis and started charting that out. And he started doing it by questions. He started by his students by asking questions to them and have them look at things in a different sort of way and more questions and more questions. And when he started mapping this analysis out, just a simple way of assigning things and seeing how it charts out so you can follow its progression over time, why what he noticed was that it was forming a double helix. Now that's just a phenomenon. And we have been talking this whole year about, I think that phenomena are important. Don't get them tied up with logical truth. They're not logical truth, but they're really important. So don't discount them. Just don't get them mixed up. Don't run around thinking in terms of like, this is going to happen this way. No, this is what I get from all this is that it's an opportunity. I really start to believe that like we have potential in life. We ask the right questions and we discover that potential. So when a phenomenon occurs, it's an opportunity for you, a stream of potential that you can ask questions about. So here he was asking questions. And what he started getting when he saw that double helix, he didn't go, oh my goodness, I found the secret of life. No, that wasn't what he did. He says, this is a phenomenon that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to ask more questions. And as he asked more questions, he started noticing how this started to map out how we have evolved over time on this planet, we humans. Uh, Go back into the very beginning, when we, in theory, walked out of the Africa and headed north towards Europe, there was probably 20, 22 different types of Homo erectus, upright types of characters with some heritage back to the threads of gorillas, monkeys, chimpanzees, etc. Right? It's in the DNA. We're very similar to the could, except we were upright. And we marched out and we spread out and and to the today we notice some deviations in DNAs when we take samples around the world that may have come. In other words, we have bred between different Homo groups, and as that progressed down, but Homo sapiens is the only one that survived. And I think that the current theory is that the Homo sapiens probably survived just because of the fact that they had larger tribal structures. In other words, they did better in war. Um, but there was some that were on islands, so there were other catastrophes that maybe occurred. It's never quite clear because there's a lot of variables. Once again, having more questions is how we get to the other variables. When we find something out and we then have more questions. We find something out and we have more questions, right? Um, we just got such a habit of looking for answers. We get it all figured out and we package it too small. It needs to be bigger. So if I've learned anything in 80 some years on this planet, it's like I need to get a bigger view. Always need to get a bigger view. So Graves' original plan then got all involved with other people. He died fairly young in life, and so he never really got to complete that through. Now it's been taken and it's changed into a popular thing is spiral dynamics that you can find some of that material on. They've done some amazing work with it. I know that an awful lot of the stuff is marketed like, here's the answer. This is what you need to know. Like, yeah. Once again, I don't like that particular approach. I am just for the approach of like, I don't need to know something. I need to have better questions. I need to have more range. I need to have more diversity. I need to see where those opportunities are. And that was what I was trying to inspire in all my students. We would do a workshop with one viewpoint, and then we'd do another workshop with a different viewpoint, and then we'd do another workshop. And I can remember a student coming over to me one time after we did a seminar for 3 days, and he said, we didn't do any energy work this weekend. We just did questions and tests and stuff. And I said, yeah, as this whole workshop came from the world of psychology. And he goes, well, why are we doing that? Well, that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Why we are doing that. Why is that field there? We've been doing things one way, and you all of a sudden start to recognize that, like, every time we teach something and do a seminar, we do a variation, we do a theme on it. So these all came from somebody's book, somebody's idea. And I just looked at their ideas and I said, can I expand it out? Can I get more diversity to it? Give me 40 people in a weekend and we can play with that. That's what I did the whole time I was there. Did they gain from that? Of course they did, because they got a lot more questions in life. They started realizing more potential for themselves. They went on to did whatever they did. And some of them just found an answer and said, that's it. And then they were, stuck with that answer. And then 10, 15 years later, get a notice from them saying, "Oh, okay, I've done this, and now what's next, Chris?" And I go, "Okay, you didn't ask enough questions back in that workshop. Let's go back and review that." So that becomes the nature of it. It's like we need to expand it out so we can start to see how it all interweaves together. So we can start to recognize what is our part in it. We come in with this small thread, and if that thread doesn't expand out, we start to then get tangled with other streams of potential. And that winds up behavioral problems or mental illness, multi-personalities. I've worked with multitude of them. Um, when you start to realize that, typically I would just decide which persona is going to be in charge. We would do some work on it and we'd say, okay, this one's in charge. The rest of you guys are just kind of like associates. And we just bring it together like a corporate structure, so that somebody was in charge. We'd have, and eventually the person then could integrate all those potentials. So we're just working from range backwards. We're trying to develop a strong you and then be able to take that and ask enough questions to say, okay, I got this me. What can I do with it? And that's exactly what we do. Everything should be a question. What else could I do? If you find an answer, you have to say, okay, that'll work. Now let me find at least two more, right? If you got three or more, operation in here is very different. We have a tendency, we humans, to be able to look at 20 different choices. We narrow it down to two. And then we take out of those, our gauge for evaluating is past experience, which is really sad. That means we're looking for something new, but we're judging it by past experience because that's our stored data that we have in our neocortex. So here we are, judged it, we narrowed it down to two things, and then we evaluated totally on past experience, and we cancel one out, and we wind up doing something that won't work or will barely work, and it won't be applicable anywhere else because it doesn't have enough range. We have to be able to have at least three going into the table, maybe 40 or 50 ideas, and narrow it down to three or four. So we can then run through and figure, okay, which one of these is going to get me a different way of doing it, a different flow, a different, so that I can experience something new and different and change. And that was the heart of what drove me to teach. I had so many talks I was doing, and so many students were coming to me, and I was working with people that uh, I can remember standing on the front porch and a lady said, I take all these classes. She had taken all kinds of classes. I think this was somewhere in Denver. And she had just been a lecture that I did. And she says, I've seen tons of people. I'm 36 years old and I've had this pain in my head ever since I was a little kid. And nobody can seem to get it out. I've been to specialists, I've been all over the place. And I said, well, let's try something. And so I said, so I have a question that I wish you to ask that little pain in your head. Ask it if it belongs in your head. Oh, okay. Well, ask. And she goes, I feel really kind of faint. I said, well, why don't I just move it out? I'm just going to put a symbol outside and have it draw to that symbol. I'll have that symbol match its energy and have it draw to there. Right? That's it, right? And she goes, oh my gosh, it's gone. I said, yeah. So she says, can I talk to you some more? I said, sure, we'll talk sometime. No problem. So the next time I talked to her, she said, what was that? What? I said, stop, stop, stop. Your goal was to get rid of it. So do you need to have a relationship with it? You wanted to end a relationship with it. So you need to let it go. You need to ask, what do I do next now? Forget about that. Where can I go? What can I accomplish now that I don't have a pain in my head? What can I do? So anyway, she left. I think it was about 2 years later. I and somebody gave me a link to a woman who was doing talks, and and she had this whole story about this pain in her head, which was her spirit guide talking to her. And once she got outside, she then had instructions. She had instructions for life by contacting the spirit guide, and it would told her everything that she needed to do. Um, but she had health challenges. She was now trying to raise money for some surgical procedure, and it was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Um, she found an answer, not a question, right? The answer just took her nowhere. The pain was no longer in her head. It was a pain outside that she was communicating with. She might as well just put it back in her head. She had a better relationship with it was pain. That there it was, now a false prophet. Uh, and this is how we operate. It's not a question of right or wrong. You got to get past that right or wrong thing. So after I had met some Graves thinking and his material and what they were doing with it, I started looking around into, started reading Robert Keaton's work. I got involved into the field of evolutionary psychology and started looking at all these pictures of how we are evolving as we start to change. Um, and then I had enough support from mathematical support, from Einstein's theories, and from light cones, et cetera, that we may talk about next year. So I want to get into anything too crazy out there. But when you start to look at that, it's kind of like I started realizing, wow, um, all of our life we're trying to. I was in college thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I got married and I'm like, what am I going to do? I got married again, and what am I going to do? And I got married again, 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 again. Like still couldn't figure out what I was going to do. I would find answers. I would then activate the answers. It would just buy me some time, not much time. And then we move on to something else. It was kind of like, wow, I went through an awful lot of jobs. It was interesting. I went through an awful lot of relationships. It was interesting. Um, I think just because I worked so many hours, I wasn't a very good person to be mated up with. I just typically most of my life worked two jobs, one full-time, one part-time. I was always involved in something and I was always counseling somebody. I was always working with someone. So I was busy. I never made uh, driving a relationship and putting more energy in a relationship and expanding it out. It became an answer, not a question for me. It took a long time for me to get it. I was over here talking about it, just like I told you people do, and then over here not living it. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was like, wow. So took some time to expand that all out. I'm hard-headed. It, and I really found that the best way I could learn was to teach. And when I started teaching, I'd see all these people making the same mistake in some variation that I had done. And it was really easy for me then to be able to say, oh my goodness, Chris, this is where you didn't change. This is where you missed the mark. Then I can share that insight with them. Um, I'm sure they thought it was all about me all the time, and maybe I was an egomaniac, but I would say, hey, this happened to me. And so you're looking at this is similar. Think about this, do that. And sometimes I could just say, just move that pin out of your head. Whatever it takes, it just means that you have a relationship with a potential, right? Like the pin in the head. That's a potential. You have a relationship with something that is not working in that format. So you need to ask questions to find out what other opportunities are available. You can't ask for what the answer is because you don't know. Remember, we gather our data from what's in the neocortex, which means thinking, which means stored past information. I'm sorry. That's what we do. That's how it operates. There's tons of research out there on that. So when you start to look at that, you start to realize the only way that I get to have something available to me that I don't know is to ask more questions, 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 questions. So I would do a workshop and I would do different themes of questions. And I had a 5-year plan I had put together because I like having that type of structure because it helps me remember that I'm not going to do this lecture next year the same way. I'm going to have a total different theme for it. I don't know what that's going to be yet. I'm going to have to ask a lot of questions. I finally got to where when I was running the center, I was just by January 1st, I'd have posters for all the workshops and all the criterion and what was going to happen, the little snippets out there and dates for them all scheduled for the whole year, 12 months of material, all scheduled. I had no idea exactly the location yet because I haven't rented anything or found a location for it or some of the details. I had absolutely no idea what the hell I was going to do in those workshops, but I scheduled it all. Do you see how that becomes my questions? Here we go. We got We got 12 months of workshops. I used to do about, I do one 3-day workshop because I had a real job. I had a job that I worked, and then I did this after work. So 5 nights a week after my job, I would teach. And then on the weekends, I had Saturday and Sunday off. So I would do seminars and workshops and talks. And so that was the schedule. And play with it because that's how I got to ask questions. And I got to learn from all of you people out there. And then I got to share that with them. I got to put it through and I said, ask this question, try this, try this, expand this out, you know, play with this concept, right? And so as we start to do that, it starts to reach. This is kind of like it's the December thing I'm throwing out. I'm sorry, it's not very concrete. It's a little bit vague, um, because automatically we just simply, I need to know what to do. That's just it. I want the answer. I want the answer. We are so conditioned to, I want the answer. But we're so affected by the whole idea of the whole idea of what the outcome is. So if we get an answer, we're going to get an outcome. We're not asking for the outcome. We have this illusion that this will produce this outcome. The range has to be pretty big. If we do something and it's going to take, if you're going to, if you're going to plan something that's going to be 10, 12 years, 14 years, going to be in a relationship 20, 30, 40 years, I'm sorry, you're going to have an awful lot of questions because one question is not going to answer that. Not how to make that a success. If you want to be healthy in life, I'm sorry, one question is not going to be. It's like, oh, I'm healthy in life because I take vitamin C. Is it good to take vitamin C? Oh, yeah, sure, it's good to take vitamin C. Is that going to be your answer? Well, maybe for a while, maybe not. Depends, right? Because there's so many other variables you have not considered, right? Not at all. So what you have to do is you have to start to take a look and you have to say, what is going on? That's why I preach meditations. For me, meditations is not exploring the meaning of life or finding the answer to the questions. So many people come back and go, I've, explored my past life. I've done this, I've done that, I've done whatever, and I'm going, gosh, yeah, all those were yesterday's answers, but they're not tomorrow's answers. So when you look back, you can get a refresh of like, if you believe in past lives, you can get a refresh in that. Past lives is fine. It just doesn't necessarily, I call them streams of potential because I don't particularly, uh, it's not, when you use terminology and phenomena and you have a discussion with someone, then right away they hear the phenomena and they go, oh, that's not real. Well, no, it's not supposed to be real. It's a stimulus, not supposed to be real. Now, if you believe they're real, that's fine. You're not wrong. It's just that, I'm sorry, you're going to be somewhere on a YouTube video like me talking about space aliens or past lives or all the above, and you're talking about phenomena. I think it's nice to interact with phenomena. Uh, I was I was up at Mount Adams with my wife and I. We went up there which is in Washington State, and we went up there for a couple of days for a little vacation. I like to take trips, and we were up there, and we there's a famous field up there, and you can go out there and you can see all the lights on the mountain. And there's this whole story about, space satellites coming in out of the mountain, etc. But I'm up there and I'm asking the questions. Okay, that's one solution, an answer for all that, maybe. Uh, but what if there would be another answer? What if I asked the question and said, okay, that's one answer. Give me two or three or four more. Give me more. Give me more information. Right. So my wife and I are sitting there saying, well, the only way we're gonna get more information is go up there on a hill. So we take up that little narrow rutted road all the way up to base camp, you know. And and what I found is that people go up to base camp the night before. The hike up the hill and the hike back down to base camp takes a whole day. So you go up to base camp the night before. You spend the night at base camp. So you've got fires going, you've got lights on, you're sleeping in your car, you're getting ready. And before first light, you get up in the morning and you can walk up the trail. It's not dangerous the first part. So for the first hour, you just kind of follow a trail. You can do that with a flashlight. Then sunlight comes out and you make it all the way to the top. And then you turn around and come back. And you're coming back when it's starting to get dark. And you got your flashlight out in the last segment. You're walking with your flashlight. And then you're at your car. You're not going to drive down that crazy hill in the middle of the dark. There is no light up there and the road is horrible. So you spend the night and you get up in the morning, you drive down. So yes, so there's all kinds of lights up there. There's all kinds of things on. So could it be space aliens inside the mountain? Maybe. I have no idea. Do I think you're crazy because of that? No, I don't think you're crazy because of that. I think that's a legitimate phenomenon. Anybody can go up there and see those lights. That's a legitimate phenomenon. I don't know if that's the answer or the only answer. So my answer was just expanded out a little bit. It's lights up there, right? It's most certainly lights up there because there's people up there, right? Different times of year. And so do you see lights all the time every night? No, you don't. Because if it's snowing or raining on top of the hill, there's nobody up there camped out going to climb that hill in the middle of a snowstorm. That ain't going to happen, you know. So it just it's not always that simple. That was a very simple one, and we were there to explore. And we stayed at a B&B where the guy that had the B&B was a mountain climber, a real mountain climber. He had been up that mountain, but he'd been up the other sides of the mountain too that required a lot more skill than just a walk up, right? And so we had talked to him. We were toying with the idea of maybe someday doing that walk up. And then after I got up there and looked around into the terrain, I decided I don't think I want to spend 12 hours hiking up that hill and then trying to come back down. I've had friends that went up the hill and then camped out somewhere, found a little valley or some area up there they could camp in and did it in a couple of days. And it was a little less strenuous, but that that doesn't allow for you to twist your ankle. That doesn't allow for you to be able to get a little dehydrated from being in the sun that long because at the upper parts, not much coverage. There's a lot of variables that go on. When you ask more questions, you get lots of more questions to ask, and there's more variables. So it wasn't a question of being able to hike 12 hours. It was a question of like, what kind of exposure you're going to be running into. And then I got to look at how much rescue they had to do. I used to be in search and rescue. So I started talking to those guys, and it's kind of like, what were the problems you're running down? People slip and fall, minor injury, but now you're not going to be able to walk that in 12 hours. So um, it's just, there's just so many variables. And this is the secret to life. There's a lot of variables, and that's unique. It's great. We sit in our world thinking that's the way everybody is, and it's not the way everybody is. I've traveled probably half the countries in the world. Looking at them, I've married a woman that likes to travel. So we've done just that. We've traveled to various different places. I've got to see how people experience life, and I got to ask really good questions. I'm not sure that I've analyzed all the possible answers, but the range is really immense. Uh, a lot of things that I didn't understand doesn't translate very well over here. I get into other cultures and I can see why they do what they do. I could understand what that means for them, right? I uh, I can I don't have a very good reaction to bread, and so I don't digest it very well. So it's not a question of gluten. I know that's popular right now, but it's just a question of I don't digest bread very well. And so as a kid, we always I was heritage was German, so we pretty much a sandwich for us is a piece of bread, a piece of pork laid on top, and then you bury it in gravy and throw potatoes all around it. That was the sandwich. It was a lunch, or at that time, lunch would have been in the evening. The main meal would have been at noon. So uh, I finally had to move away from eating all that bread because I couldn't digest it and I couldn't sleep. And so I have all these bags under my eyes by the time I was in high school, I looked like my kidneys had failed. Freshman year in high school, I got a picture of me, and I got bags were huge under my eyes because there was never quite enough sleep. So that sleep is really very important, and we need about 7 hours a night, and that's where we update all our files and get everything current and get and, and so I I struggled with that as a kid, and then started playing with the idea of being able to. I saw them test me, and I realized, wow, I could test myself by going on a little fast for a couple of days and then eat a food and then see what reaction it had. And so, yeah, I know you can get that online. Naturopaths use that. So I started going. So by the time I got into college, I was easily doing fasts and meditations that might last. I mean, I got up, the longest one I ever did was 50 days. Now, today they say that most certainly it's unhealthy, so I'm not recommending you do anything unhealthy. But at the time, all my friends were just getting drunk all the time, and I wasn't drinking. So all of a sudden, I seemed like, hey, I can't do that much damage by not eating. Um, and I could feel somewhere after about 20 days, my body started clearing. Yes, I drank a lot of water, but most certainly the body started clearing. I started sleeping better. I started being relaxed. I took naps. It was kind of amazing. I, hunger is easy. That goes away by the end of 15, 20 days. At least for me, it was not a problem at all. And and so then I did that. I went to a couple of meditation retreats that lasted for a week, and we would just fast for the whole week and do meditations. And it was like interesting, all kinds of phenomena. I took notes down of all the weird stuff that I saw and did. And then when I came back, I just used that as basis for questions. And I started saying, what was that? I have a question. What was that I saw? So let me see the options. So then I took a list. At the time, I was writing down as options. And then after a little while, a couple of years, I started looking at it. I said, wow, I have all these sheets of options. I shouldn't have made those questions. And then I did a short meditation. I like 20-minute meditations myself. I think when I get lost, it's kind of like you do a search online and you're searching for something 15, 20 minutes, you're searching for all the details. After that, it's kind of like it gets so redundant, it's just boring, right? So I go into long meditations, and it's almost like I'm watching a 3 hour movie of something or other. It's like, so I like short meditations, but if you like long meditations, go for it. I don't see a problem with that whatsoever, because my goal is to find more questions. So I took each one of those little snippets I wrote down and I sat with them, and I found that I could fill another piece of paper with questions I got about that snippet that I did 8, 9 years before. It's like, wow, I didn't know that. And then there were things I had to actually look up, and there were things I had to ask friends of mine about that I had no clue of. It's like, wow. And that expansive range was just really profound. So when I was teaching, students would come back and they'd say, how can you do how can you do a weekend seminar? That's I recorded them. So that was 7 CDs of my talking. All right. Then we did exercises and stuff. So it's 3 days. So 7 CDs, that's 7 hours of me talking, and I don't have any notes. And he said, how do you do that? And I said, well, I just make up a list of questions, and I sit with those questions for a couple of days before, and then I leave them home. And then I show up at the seminar, and now it's integrated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out the questions. And then whatever I see shows up in a room, that tells me what direction to go and how to unfold with it. And so I just watch that flow, right? It's just, come on, we're empathetic. We relate to people. That influence is there. It's been proven. It's like, that's what it is. So I flow it out and I see where it goes. Next group, different time, same seminar, different time. It's all going to be different because of the group, not because of some prepared crap that I got. That's totally useless. It's just simply same questions. I'm throwing it out there, and it's like, wow, the answers are totally different today. Okay, cool. Let's go with that. Let's see where we're going to go. Let's play with that. And so that's what I did. It's just letting it flow, giving a better flow of where it's going. This is not going to be a very long talk because, as you can see, I'm already getting very redundant or repetitive on that. When you're not looking for an answer, you wind up with these long lists of points. And as I write them down, I try to write them down as a question. Write them down as a question. I didn't do that at first, but I started doing that. Write them down as a question. I've got a project. I got a vacation. I've got one coming up. I have a lot of questions about. I'm going to do today. I'm going to do a meditation. I'm going to go a hike. I'll come back. I'm going to do a meditation. And then I'm going to come out. I'm going to write down the questions that came up that I'm going to need to research later on the computer so that I don't run into any stumbling blocks because it's a country I've been to before, but post-COVID things have changed, right? They got all these, I don't know, whatever. And so it's like I really need to get current with what's going on. You know, I can I felt sorry for a guy. He was with his wife and three kids, and I was crossing the border in Canada. So I was going on to a trip in Canada. And he was sitting there and I was waiting and uh he was trying to explain to his wife that 20 years ago, when he was in college, he got arrested for drunk driving. Canada will not let you in to Canada if you have an arrest on your record for drunk driving in America. So here he is with his family, planned a vacation, three kids and his wife, and they're all set to go. They've got bookings for hotels and everything. And they get there and they pull up his file and find he's got a prior on drunk driving, and they won't let him in the country. So here they are trying to make phone calls and cancel reservations and recoup some of their money and try to figure out where they're going to go to for their vacation. It's like, what a disappointment. He didn't ask quite enough questions, right? I didn't, I've never been arrested for anything, but nonetheless, I'd never thought of those terms. And so it's just, I've never been much of a drinker. And so that's just like in college days, I was always the designated driver because I wasn't drinking. Um, and the reason I didn't drink wasn't because I was, was a better person. It's because I worked a nighttime job. So I had to go to work. I worked in a grocery store overnight in a stocking crew. So here I'm going to college. I would get off work at the stocking crew at 8 o'clock in the morning. My first class was at 9 o'clock. So I had to get off work and then quickly get to school to be there at college at 9 o'clock for the first class. Somewhere in the afternoon, I'd take about a 2 or 3 hour nap. And then when I would get home from college, I would usually take a couple hour nap before I go to work and work another 8 hours overnight. So it wasn't a whole lot of sleep. And until I could get my head around, like, how do I do this better? How do I start to change this? How do I start to? And then things started working totally different. I was arm wrestling it, right? I had a solution. I just put more energy into it, put more energy into it, put more energy into it, just fight with it, right? And gosh, that was like so silly. We've all done that. I know I get people all the time that no, I'm going to make this. I'm going to make this relationship work. I'm going to make this job work. I was treated unfairly. Blah 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 blah. Like, no, stop. You got to say, what's the question? If this is not working for me, what are my options? I, I don't know how many times I've quit a job. I have never been unemployed for more than a week in my life, and I have quit a lot of jobs. I've already told you I quit a lot of relationships. I also quit a lot of jobs. I also was never out of a relationship for very long, maybe 2 weeks at most. So it was simple because I would see something like that and ask a question. What's next? I don't need the story of what just happened. Hopefully I learned from that. So what's next? Next, next, next. Show me options. Pretty soon the list got longer and longer. And then I'd have a long list and I'd sit there and do a meditation and I'd say, okay, here's a list of 12 questions that I need to pursue. Let's see which one pops up first. And I wake up tomorrow morning and something happened and there the experience was. And then, come on, you guys have all done this. you're planning a trip somewhere, and next thing you know, you're in a coffee shop and you hear people sitting next to you just came back and they're talking about the trip. And that serendipitous is just very common with us humans, right? So we just seek that out. We literally float questions out. We're just not cognizant of it. Putting our attention on it gives us that range. So I made a big pitch for asking questions. You got it? That's the most important thing. This Christmas, don't ask what Santa's going to bring to you, right? No, ask what questions that you're going to wake up with, that you're going to be able to deal with next year, right? What is going to expand your range? What's going to expand your adventure? For Christmas, you should have a long list of potential questions to play with, just out of the experience of watching other people around you. What's working for them? What's not? What do you have to do to have it work for you better? What's going on that you need to learn? Write those questions down and be able to sit with them, not to find an answer, but to find more questions. The questions open up a range that opens up potential, and then you have an experience in life rather than an answer in your head that you then can't figure out how to execute. You need to get to the experience. Well, you'll find your way there through questions. All right. So I've said enough. And thank you very much. It's been a wonderful year. So if you look at all the talks that I did, the blogs were on a different theme, but all the talks I did this year, it's just the idea is that I was trying to communicate by teaching to share with people because I had done 20 years of working with people on the sidelines or on days off and counseling them and seeing the same problems come up and giving them solutions that they would then do for a little while. I'm on how many people overweight and go on a diet, lose weight, and then put it back on again, lose weight and put it back on again, right? This is the redundancy of humans. This package is majority redundancy, but really only conscious, according to George A. Miller, 7 ± 2 bits. Bit is just a package, right? Holds small package. And that's all a bit is. Might be 4 or 5 pieces, might be 1 or 2 pieces, but that's a bit. And so we're not really very conscious. We like to think we're conscious, but we're not. And so all this stuff is automated. So it's redundant. So that means that we're 93% redundant, just the old wheels turning. We really need a bigger track to run on, bigger range, right? And so better questions. All right. Thank you very much. And if you do have any questions for me, I go ahead and email chris@wizardscatch.com. And that's Chris with 2 S's and then Wizardscatch, WIZARDSCACHE. That's also plural. And I would be glad to answer your questions. I can send you back an email or I can make a talk on it. And I would be glad to do that. So as I think that shared questions are really very, very beneficial for all of us. And we can all learn from those. So thank you very much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. Right.